Hi guys, uh, hope you're able to see me fine. Thanks, Mahesh and Dr. Sumita for kicking this off. Awesome. Uh, some nice features that Airmate has, which are very useful for making such remote presentations a little interesting. Super. So for the next 50 minutes, um, what I'd like to do is talk about what's happening. Pragati, which is our homegrown brand name for our communication services, essentially has two parts to it. Um all of you would have received the newsletter. We commit to having a newsletter every month which gives inputs about what's happening in the community, who's doing what, and kind of bringing it all together. Like Mahesh said at the start, this is an effort at also having a dialogue. For today, we have a certain structure in place, but really everything we do is should be guided by you. So I strongly encourage all of you to reach out to me directly, or to Ruchi, or to Mahesh, or to Shalini, any of us, just our names at the rate sahamati.org.in. That's the email to give us areas that you think we should cover in future sessions, and we'll try and harness the content so that it is meaningful and relevant. Right now, Dr. Sumita really helped us give the structure for what I thought is a useful way to present what's the pragati that's been happening in our ecosystem right now, right? So let me just select and share my screen. Uh, Give me a moment. Okay, so you should be able to uh, now see a nice image of a very popular, spot in Kerala, and I we love this image because I think it kind of evokes a feeling of hard work being done by a community, together, and that's really what describes a lot of what we'd like to do and how we'd like to be viewed by all of you. Uh, I am sure all of you have known of Sahamati and we've interacted in several forums, but my name is Vamsi. Along with Mahesh, Ruchi, and Shalini, we are part of the team at Sahamati that is helping the community of all of the FIUs, FIPs, AAs, and the technology service providers do what it takes to make this a real vibrant ecosystem, right? Uh, Going back to my reference to Dr. Sumita, what I will speak about, hopefully, I'll not take more than 30 minutes. Slide decks are usually boring, and I empathize and sympathize with all of you. But we'll try and wrap it up in about 30, 35 minutes. And then my encouragement to you is to add any questions you may have in chat if you find those are not addressed, and I'll do my best to kind of speak through those, right? Uh, what is the pragati that has happened till date? Let's just pause for a moment and look at a couple of stats. All of us in the community will probably like this nice little milestone that's kind of been crossed. Uh, a couple of days into this week, earlier this week, we crossed about 100,000 successful consents. What does that mean? It means about 100,000 individuals who were looking for typically a loan, in some cases a PFM service, but largely uh, loan, business loans or car loans, etc., have used the account aggregator rails to give the permission for data sharing through APIs, and the data has been successfully received by the FIUs, right? Um, so this is indeed nice, metric, very small in the context of what our country really represents as the TAM, as the addressable market, but nevertheless a very important milestone that encourages all of us. The second metric is the total number of accounts that have been linked across all the A's, or what we term as A enabled. So 115,000 account owners have actually linked their accounts across the A's that are live. So give yourselves a pat on the back, all of you who are engaged with the ecosystem, because I think this is at least a decent start, and we really think there's much more to come. Now, Dr. Sumita's paper does a nice job of giving us the structure for how to discuss performance, and broadly, the paper is divided into two parts. One is, it says, look, we must measure performance. Of course, the focus of all of that in the end is financial inclusion. Um, but if we look at what performance really means, and I encourage all of you, just as a game, to read this slide from right to left. Um, the societal goal of increasing financial inclusion translates into business goal for all FIUs and FIPs and AAs in terms of increasing reach and decreasing cost, right? And we all understand that very well. The goal of reaching out to underserved markets, be it geographies that were hitherto underserved, physically, that happening digitally, and the goal of reducing the cost so that sachetizing of loans happens, and so we can serve large volume, low value needs much better than earlier, is the end state. But for that to happen, given that this is all digital, performance means the metric of better funnel conversion, right? For the digital architects, the product managers, and all of those who are focusing on user experience and ensuring that users are comfortable interacting digitally. And at least one part of that funnel conversion depends on the metrics that the developer ecosystem is worried about, which is, hey, are the rails reliable, right? And so when we think of it, and the rest of the deck is largely meant to provide two kinds of information to all of you. One is, uh, for these kinds of metrics to be measured and improved, uh, what are the levers that need to be put in place so that we are able to keep measuring progress and pragati in the ecosystem meaningfully, right? Uh, but before that, what are the metrics across each of these three kinds of roles that we must be in a position to feed, so that each one of you is able to actually measure your own performance and take necessary steps, right? Um, so the first goal, like Dr. Sumita mentioned, is to have a dashboard, right? And I want to now present. So there are two parts to the whole dashboard service of what we'd like to enable. One is already up on the website, which has the basic metrics of consents and accounts linked in the industry, right? The second level metric, and we want to roll this out starting next week to the live participants who are members of the Sahamati Alliance. And we'll speak about those numbers later in terms of how many entities are live, etc. We will start providing individual member only dashboard links, and those links will be broken into FIU metrics and FIP metrics. Now, the important funnel for an FIU that we see everybody being worried about is the funnel from sending a consent request to receiving the data, right? So that specific funnel is what needs attention, and I dare say that as we go forward in the next few weeks and months, optimizing this, refining this, fine tuning this at scale is going to be pretty much what we must get right. And so what we will offer through this dashboard is the ability for uh, each FIU to look at how that funnel looks like for themselves, right? It's going to be available only to them. And how we source it is that the AAs give aggregate statistics, and we have figured out a process, again, community driven process, where the AAs feed the MIS into a system, and thanks to a set of very committed volunteers, we have put together a dashboard and we run it and maintain it, so that those links will be made available to members, so that they can look at this funnel. Second is a comparison of each member's kind of performance against the rest of the industry. So that's just to give a sense of relative performance and ensure that people are able to take calls around what's urgent versus what's important for them to improve, right? This is on the FIU. So two key metrics. One is the funnel between consent requests fulfilled to consent requests raised, uh, the ability to filter that on a date wise basis so that you can see if there are improvements you're making in the journeys along with AAs bilaterally, is that really resulting in improvement? And the ability to also look at whether there are differences from one AA to the other, right? In terms of what the stats look like. And second, an aggregated view of overall how the industry is looking like. And with feedback we will keep refining this and ensure that we are able to make this more meaningful. The second one, which is the performance as an FIP. I apologize for the busyness of this slide. I will walk you through it. Really, there are three metrics today that we capture thanks to the efforts of all of the AAs for measuring FIP performance. One is broad business performance, which I mentioned earlier. How many account owners are using A, right? So how many accounts linked? That's the count. But the specific reliability API around the data fetch API, which is the all important API, which really measures finally after all the customers' consent is data finally coming, right? So, how good is that reliability of that API? Second, how good is the response time of that API, right? And so again, much like FIU, each member is going to get a dashboard link that has their own, you know, performance privately available and an industry aggregate so that they can compare. And I've just kind of highlighted two, metrics here just to indicate what we're seeing. It's been about what 30 plus weeks since the ecosystem truly went live. We're seeing consistency, which is good news. Hopefully, it will stay this way. And even if it doesn't, I think the industry, all of you have enough expertise with the likes of UPI systems, etc., to know what to do. But there's consistency uh, in the high 90s. At least all the early adopting banks have high 90 rates for uptime of the data fetch API, which is very, very good. And the average performance of that API for returning data, and typically imagine this to be maybe 6 to 12 month history of a CASA account. It's taking roughly between 6 to 8 seconds. Of course, there are outliers, and of course, not all FIPs are at the same level, but this is like an industry average that we are seeing. And this is good input for us in the next few weeks to harness community opinion on what SLA should look like, right? And we are in the business. I'll come to that in the end. So this is around measuring performance. Now, Dr. Sumita's and her colleagues' paper then goes on to describe 7 different prerequisites for success. So if our performance ultimately means that those three metrics, starting with developer metrics to product manager metrics to business metrics, all have to climb up, then 7 levers must be exercised or must be paid attention. What I'm going to do the rest of this is focus on 5 of those, because actually there is work happening in the community on those 5 prerequisites that Dr. Sumita has identified in a paper. The first one, and perhaps the most critical one, is data privacy and security. Now, on each of these slides, the structure is I'm going to describe what's already in place through efforts in the community and what we think are the top, biggest roadmap items that we are currently working on. Data privacy and security. The checks and balances, the paper speaks about the need for adequate checks and balances to ensure that customer trust improves, and that will in fact be a force multiplier for adoption. We'd like to break checks and balances into 2 parts: tech checks and balances, and then legal checks and balances. On the tech checks and balances, again, I'd like to break it up into 3 parts. The first is providing a technical guarantee for best practices in security being actually followed by the participants in the ecosystem. The efforts towards having a certification framework have resulted in 37 entities today, and we count even technology service providers who have the ability to procure what's called an intermediate certified entity status, essentially giving the market the messaging that their middleware is already compliant with the Rebate specs and therefore giving confidence that the turnaround times for implementation will come down, right? So, including technology service providers, but more critically, including FIUs, FIPs, AS, we have 37 entities whose APIs have been certified. What's the roadmap? We're working on expanding the scope of the certification to apps as well. So, APIs are backend. The apps that the AAs offer in what are called AA clients and which are then embedded in the FIU apps, how do we ensure that those are built, deployed, distributed in a secure fashion? There's work happening on that direction. The second aspect is privacy, particularly when there are integrations between two domains. So the FIU domain is where the customer is interacting, say, to get a loan. The AA domain is the customer's interaction to give permission for data. Now, in the process of offering an integrated journey, there must not be any leaks of privacy. Uh, where PII is inadvertently being shared between these two domains without customers' consent, right? So, in that direction, web redirection guidelines have already been, and this is one of the community guidelines, community driven guidelines, which provide a baseline today for FIUs and AS to be integrated through a redirection approach. The roadmap is that we are working on having similar guidelines. They're already in draft stage. There is a working group working to finalize that as embedded AA client guidelines. And indeed, the trend in the market will be that a lot of the journeys will perhaps move towards deeper embedding of the two domains, and that will essentially need these privacy guidelines. The third aspect, which is very interesting, which the paper also calls out, is about truly embracing explicit informed consent in spirit. How do you ensure that the institutional architecture that's there are consent managers who are supposed to basically act on behalf of customers? How do you ensure that those screens are doing a good job of educating consumers about what explicit informed consent stands for, right? So policy enforcement, the privacy policy which is embedded in the consent artifact and through the architecture of consent managers, how do you provide a checklist to enforce adherence to that, right? That's one area of work in which some work has already happened. We have a customer experience guidelines checklist which the community is now using to ensure that there is consistent implementation of the digital interfaces that take consent. And of course, we have some distance to go to impose more consistency, but a baseline has been arrived at. What's on the roadmap? The term confidential is there for multiple reasons. It's a hint at what at something that's cooking, which is called confidential computing. But then I'm going to keep that confidential too because there's more work that needs to happen. I'll save that for a later update. This was the tech side of it. Now, what are the legal checks and balances that are in place, right? And why do you need legal checks and balances if everything can be done technically, right? Well, the fact of the matter is that this is a multi-party ecosystem, and at any transaction that needs fulfillment needs at least three parties, if not a fourth, that need to bind themselves to commonly understood terms and conditions. Now, if we have to encourage choice to citizens, we have to encourage that all parties are working with each other. And therefore, we have to ensure that the legal friction in having bilateral legal agreements is reduced to the maximum extent possible. So, one of the efforts that's already happened, as many of you already know, is that there is a multi party ecosystem participation terms that we offer as an asset to the members of the ecosystem, and 38 signatories today exist across banks, NBFCs, the NBFCAs themselves, registered investment advisors, and even securities companies are beginning to start engaging with the ecosystem. SEBI registered companies. So a total of 38 signatories today across these various kinds of entities have signed up to a common terms, which is uh, great news because what it implies is that much like a UN treaty, there is a common set of TNCs that mutually are agreed to, but in a multi-party environment without parties having to bilaterally negotiate every time and sign every time, an agreement. What's the roadmap? Obviously, we'll have to keep evolving these terms in line with industry feedback. A lot of feedback is being collected already. And so having a robust change management process is the roadmap. But this only takes care of the non commercial terms and conditions. There is still the commercial agreements that particularly FIUs and AAs today sign up with. And in the future, and this is one of the elements that I'm not addressing today, but the paper calls out is ecosystem pricing models that ensure that even FIPs, incentives are in place or cost structures are taken care of. So there will be commercial agreements taking care of all of these things. Now, one of the important aspects we've realized is that in such commercial agreements, boundaries of who the AA is providing a service to and boundaries of particularly data that the FIU gets through the AA, what can be done by the FIU in terms of further onward sharing. For example, FIUs have data processors who process data on their behalf as a service to them, who will obviously need access to the raw data. Several of them have lead generation partners who bring customers to them, right? So, such participants who are not regulated themselves and who are not directly FIUs but provide a service to the FIU may end up having some role to play in accessing the data, particularly, and in some cases, even providing front end integration journeys for customers. So a checklist that binds, and this is again through consultations with key early adopters and community participants, a checklist that helps FIUs and AAs craft a common set of TNCs, particularly with respect to two aspects. How should data be handled when data is delivered to the FIU from the AA? What are the FIU's do's and don'ts for handling such data vis-a-vis their own partners? And who does the AA really serve? The fact that the AA serves regulated entities, which is the FIU, has to be brought out very clearly in the legal agreements. So, as Sahamati, a community driven checklist has recently been drafted, and that's why it crosses the yellow line a little bit because while it's in the roadmap, it's a short term roadmap, right? And then finally, the overarching data protection bill that we all know, has been in the making for some time, will play a role in further strengthening data privacy and security checks and balances. Well, all that one can say is watch the space. We think it is any time now, but who knows, right? So as and when that happens, I think our community really harnessing information in the bill and providing a path for entities to implement that will come into these legal agreements for sure. The second aspect that the paper calls out as a critical lever is obviously user experience. User experience, in a nutshell, is a mix of two things. One is being able to offer multiple integration paths, which is already happening. There are integration paths either in terms of embedded integrations or redirections, and within that, there is innovation happening as to how users can fulfill their journeys with minimal touch points, right? But on the other hand, there is a need to balance that innovation with some kind of consistency. Several experts that have advised us from the UPI world have always said that one of the successes behind UPI is a commonality of experience. And that really has to be brought in place here. While in some senses, the presence of consent managers as federated entities does that. Imagine if you didn't have consent managers and if consumers had to directly deal with their FIPs for the act of giving consent directly to them, then you're talking potentially of a footprint of hundreds of institutions and harnessing commonality amongst them. So, in some ways, the institutional architecture of having a smaller set of consent managers federating out this act of authentication and authorization and all of that on behalf of the FIPs is indeed bringing some sort of commonality. But then it's not one consent manager. That also is based on several private entities getting licensed, and therefore we still have a problem of having a consistency in the interaction design at some level. So what we've done so far, again thanks to community efforts, is put together what's called a customer experience guidelines checklist. Covers 57 different line items, uh, graded over what are must-haves to what are nice-to-haves, and grouped into 8 areas, right, which affect customer experience. Like branding of the AA, education to the customer, privacy agreements display, and so on and so forth, right? What's the roadmap? The roadmap is that we really need to put our heads together around how to bring a common approach to the fact that there are multiple AAs who are going to offer their client interfaces. And if we need to get to a position where you and I as citizens, much like in UPI, we go to any merchant today, we are able to give our handle that we have, say, either on a Google Pay app or a Phone Pay or what have you. And the merchant is obliged to honor that, and seamlessly the flow happens regardless of which third party app I've signed up with, right? We need to have a similar case here where, regardless of where I may have already signed up with, if I have signed up with an A, that is, then the FIUs must be able to honor that choice of mine without any friction. So there is some work that we all need to collectively do in figuring out, technically, operationally, commercially, legally, how do we bind these four aspects to ensure there is more commonality in the common aspects of that interaction, so that adoption happens, right? But the second aspect of user experience, again, that it calls out very validly, is a network effect, which is the more the FIPs, the more the users, and the more the users, the more transactions. So where are we today? This is obviously a question uppermost on many of your minds. We have this information already on our website, but let me summarize. We've got 9 FIPs live as of today, and those names of those banks are there in alphabetical order. You see names of a variety of banks, obviously the biggies, and the young ones who are digitally very savvy. You've got a mix, right, of all of those banks. We have at least three very large ones, exciting names: State Bank of India, the biggest; Union Bank of India, Indian Bank, public sector banks who we know, as per declarations from AAs working with them, and they themselves are in UAT. So if you look at just these 12 FIPs, we are talking about a footprint or a reach of maybe about 500 million, ballpark figure, CASA accounts. And we are only talking single owned retail or sole proprietorship, savings and current accounts here, right? So the footprint is in place in terms of the reach. Now it's a matter of having friction resolved in terms of number of FIUs that are reaching out to this, and user journeys, and so on and so forth. What does the roadmap look like? I know there are several of you who will have questions at different grades, and uh, our visibility is not at the same degree of clarity. The first grade is, is the banking footprint increasing? We count today at least 20 other banks that are in different stages of development or testing, right? And so hopefully in the next few months, this figure of 9 will increase to hopefully closer to 20 or 30, and that brings in more people. We count at least 12 folks from the insurance sector, which is very exciting because for the first time that will be outside of the banking world. Not enough visibility today, but hopefully in the months to come in the Pragati sessions, we will have more information about when some of these insurance companies will actually have live, at least POCs or CUGs happening in a live environment. But we do know that several of them have actually already started working. And then one important aspect is to expand the footprint of the FI types from single loan to joint and corporate, because a lot of open banking use cases are indeed meant for SMEs and corporate. A lot of active work happening both in the community at Rabbit's level, and we know that for a fact because we've been engaging with them. And so hopefully the necessary clarity around any changes required to the rails, right, at the FIP end or the A end to support expansion to joint and corporate accounts is around the corner. Hopefully, within the next, I would say, 8 weeks, we should definitely have clarity around this, and then we start tracking time frame for this to be expanded, right? So that is the next determinant of better user experience, because then consumers start seeing their own banks on the network and they start using it more. So this is where we are on that, right? The third, lever that we spoke about, and I know I'm doing terribly on time, but hopefully this is still interesting enough, and we will see later with feedback from you how to make it tighter and better, is grievance redressal. Dr. Sumita and Mahesh spoke about this. This has been a focus area, and in fact, one of the biggest priorities right now. And you know, uh, like Sharad, the Vice President, once put it to us, he said, if we are pushing a multi-party ecosystem as the way forward in several areas, then it's obligatory that we also have a multi-party grievance redressal, system that is robust and put in place parallelly. Grievance redressal, in terms of the approach, is a three-tier approach. At the apex is always the regulatory redressal mechanism that exists today across the four sectoral regulators for their entities, and typically that provides a path for consumers, for citizens, particularly, not necessarily ecosystem participants, business entities, but customers being able to raise their grievances directly to, say, RBI Ombudsman, for example, and that exists at the apex of the mechanism available. The middle tier is what RBI itself has been pushing a lot, and we are very happy that we are finding a lot of support in our ecosystem to pioneer this in the account aggregator world, is online dispute resolution, where there are private parties who offer mechanisms to resolve disputes in an online world, and that caters to both customer grievances if required, but also to participant issues and disputes, where legal assistance is required, right? But the bottom, and there is a reason why I chose this pyramid kind of a mechanism, because we believe that the volumes also will perhaps be where maximum issues will be tackled at an automated issue resolution mechanism, where issues, concerns, and they may not even be disputes. It will just be a simple, I need help, I need support, and I don't know who to go to because there are three parties involved in a transaction type of scenario being catered to through a automated system. And automation itself will be in various grades. So this is an approach that we are putting in place, and happy to announce that starting this coming week, starting Monday, we are rolling out the version 1.0 of what we call the Sahamati members portal. This is going to be exclusively for the A ecosystem participants, those who are active members of the alliance, have signed up to the alliance's terms, and who are live, because we believe those are the ones that need this the most. Obviously, with feedback, if we need this to be extended to UAT environments, we can do so. What this offers, and I will show you a quick sneak preview, it offers a common portal for any FIU today, particularly, to raise a ticket or raise an issue. And Sahamati, through a combination of this system that we host and our personnel, will mediate wherever needed, and will automate wherever possible, at least a first response coming back, right? Because in most of these cases, as all of us know, the larger heartburn is in not having information about what is happening about an issue, right? Uh, of course, we all want issues to be resolved as soon as we want, but even more critically, we want to know if somebody is even looking at it, and we want periodic updates. So that SLA-driven, collaborative issue resolution and communication mechanism is really what the first promise of this first version is. The roadmap for this is that we are going to then standardize the data attributes that participants have to offer if there is an issue by way of their logs or responses on that issue, and we call that a standardized electronic discovery file. And finally, at some level, instead of emails and attachments being harnessed, there will be APIs that each participant can expose, and we'll work on a standard API layer, which, much like the standard layer today for data sharing, allows for grievance related information to also be shared through APIs, and that makes it even more seamless and automated, right? And all of this as tech being complemented with the availability of ODR services through a set of empaneled ODR service providers, who are ready to offer their services to the ecosystem if arbitration or mediation or conciliation services are required, beyond the automated resolution mechanism, right? And so all of this will come together, but first, version 1, which is the first step, is going to be rolled out next week. Sneak preview of how this looks like. Every member and all of you who are live participants today will receive, starting Monday, you will receive invitations to sign up to this portal. You sign up to the portal and you see a home page. If I can take your attention to the top menu, where there are four options. The third option is the most critical one, called tickets. But this will additionally allow you to answer two questions, which we typically keep getting from everyone. The first question is, hey, who are the organizations in the ecosystem? Who else is working on AA? Right? Each one of you wants to know that. So the organizations tab provides a list of all the organizations, including even the technology service providers. So you can mutually discover each other, and you can, reach out to each other if required, with SPOC names that will, over a period of time, get populated. Right. So the idea is to facilitate collaboration without, and we being hampered by not knowing who to reach out to. The second question that typically people want to know is, who's live and how do I reach out to someone? So while we have a resolution mechanism that I'm showcasing here, uh, it is perhaps useful that people also know who to reach out to bilaterally and not always depend on a central resource, because that itself at scale could become a bottleneck. So a live participant subset list with SPOC names is also going to be provided. But coming back to the central issue of ticket management, what this offers is a very simple, commonsensical approach of providing a structure, thereby forcing some basic metadata to be captured, of participants being able to identify who they think related participants are, if they are. For example, an FIU may say, hey, through AA1 and FIP2, I am getting this issue more often than not, right? So, a simple ability to declare that provides automation mechanisms for emails to flow to the SPOCs and a first response SLA driven, response coming back from those institutions, right? And so the experience of FIUs will be that you have a portal, you then get a first response SLA from Sahamati immediately with a ticket ID issued, and then you get periodic updates based on the first response SLAs that FIPs and AAs bind themselves to, right? The same thing will obviously apply to AAs who may have issues, or to FIPs who may have issues. This can be used by each one of them, but we believe that FIUs will be the first parties to use this, right? Now, we spoke about three levers, two more levers, and one slide each, and I promise I'll stop. The fourth lever that the paper calls out is that for the ecosystem to grow, there must be adequate support from the regulators and from the government. And just wanted to share with you that there's indeed a lot of work happening, and there's indeed a lot of very positive support that we are seeing beyond, of course, the September 2nd launch, where the Deputy Governor of RBI spoke. The Ministry of Finance, as all of you have seen, has been continuously supporting in terms of putting out press notes and tweets. Uh, SEBI is working, and between iSpirit, Sahamati, we are working with SEBI on plugging in AA as a key theme for a hackathon that they are putting in terms of fintech, data privacy, etc., for their ecosystem. The Bank for International Settlements, which is the bankers bank globally, is watching AA very closely. They are authoring and have indeed already released a paper or two on digital banking, in which they have made a mention of AA. Niti Aayog, you would have all seen the tweets, has announced a month-long hackathon in partnership with PhonePe, and AA is one part of it. In fact, there is a special panel discussion on AA planned for next week. And the Department of Revenue is obviously, a lot of work is happening at the policy level to bring in GSTN. More on that later. It's still work in progress at policy and tech levels, but I think the assurance that we can all derive is that there is indeed a lot of support work coming in from regulators and government. Of course, we need more of this. Of course, we need much more than what's happening, but there is at least good momentum. And so, lastly, bringing it all together, and this is the fifth lever that I picked up, where the paper from Dr. Sumita and others in Indicus Foundation speaks about Sahamati as a self-regulated industry alliance. Just want to put this out there that the structure is, again, in terms of volumes, we've got an ever increasing community of people who attend weekly tech forums. We've got at least 30, 40 organizations that from the technology service provider and the AA tech world that collaborate, congregate there. We've kicked off at least 6 to 7 working groups, and there are a few more in the making, which are across FIUs, FIPs, AAs, and TSPs to work on several of these, problem areas which need community-driven artifacts. And there is an ever-increasing, body of volunteers. We count at least 30 of them who pitch in reactively or proactively whenever required. We then have steering committees. Today we have two active steering committees, the AA and TSP. They are CXO level steering committees. We are in the business of announcing bank and NBFC level steering committees shortly. We are working on the mechanics for that. Again, CXOs of banks and NBFCs who will provide oversight to activities of the alliance. And then the same will happen for insurance, RI, and securities. And the apex sort of governing councils that provide oversight overall is a governing council and an advisory council, right? And so we hope that we will keep getting better at harnessing community initiatives through this structure and providing services back so that friction reducers are enabled and we have more scale, right? Please write in to team@sahamati.org.in. The reason for this slide is to actually encourage more of you to consider joining working groups or volunteers, particularly those who are in the FIPs and FIUs here in the audience here. And you will find that it is beneficial both for your own projects within your organization, but also very exciting as professionals to contribute to something. With that, let me pause here and stop sharing. Uh, Super. So I'll quickly take questions. I think I have all of 3 minutes and then I'll end the session. Um Will the recording, okay, any revenue model decided? So Sanjeev is asking about revenue model decided for FIP. Sanjeev, this is one of the areas where we had some work through a bankers group meeting. In fact, even before the ecosystem went live in September, there's work done by the AAs, by the AA steering committee in putting forth a model. I think over the next few weeks, we will actually see the bankers steering committee, once it is formed, take this up with you know uh, more vigor. But there is a model in place for stoking initial thought in terms of what the FIP and even FIPs don't really look at it as a revenue model. It is more compensation for cost of service, is the way FIPs have put it. Some work has happened. What's the status of GSTN? Prabhat from Bank of Baroda. Like I mentioned, policy work still in place. Very positive information coming in, but please give us some time to give more concrete updates. It is in the works, and definitely very positive support from Department of Revenue, which oversees GSTN, has come through. So we hope that this will indeed be a formal reality very soon. Yeah, sorry, Mahesh, I know that you've already responded to some. Uh, Ram is speaking about SLAs. Yes, indeed. SLAs will be for both FIPs and AAs. Of course, it will be back to back. ASLAs will in large part depend on, FIP SLAs. So the SLA working group has kicked off. We have participation from 3 banks, some of the biggest ones there. Very exciting to have their participation. And the key program spokes of the AAs are part of that working group. So hopefully they will harness their organizational thought, and we will have good SLAs. I would suspect that our target is by the end of March, we have a draft of the SLA that can come in. Nirav, yeah, so I mentioned about where we are with A integration with OK in the context of GEM GST. So again, as we speak right now, we are tracking a date of, or the date is already well nigh, 20th, where A integration with Sahai as an LSP for the purpose of GST Sahay being rolled out is being tracked. Um, in the months of by March end or by April is when we expect GST Sahay with SIDBI as both the LSP and the lender, first lender happening. But there are several lenders who are already OCEN ready and they are already live on the GEM platform as well. So there is a GEM phase 2 also being planned. Dates for that are not yet available, but it is now come up as a priority stack where GEM Sahay phase 2 will involve underwriting not just based on the purchase orders that GEM provides, but also CASA data through AS. And so work on that is beginning. My sense is, I would say the first quarter of the financial year 2023, we should see both Sahay GST and Sahay GEM, at least moving into test and initial go live. Um, can any regulator like income tax department be FIU? Ganeshan from Protean. So this is really subject to RBI's notification of who FIPs and FIUs are. So the government itself being an FIU is one of those, at least from our perspective and my perspective, a gray area, because if you strictly read the RBI master direction, it says FIUs are only entities who are registered with and regulated by a financial sector regulator. I think some of this is overlapping with the data protection bill and the role that government entities will play. Also, there are cases where we are beginning to have conversations where government entities also have government, bodies like there's NABARD, for example, which is regulated by RBI, and therefore uh, working through such bodies for use cases being fulfilled by government departments is a distinct possibility. Early days, but I think government directly playing the role of an FIU will probably require regulatory clarification, not immediately assumed to be a reality, but government working through its own regulated entities in the spaces of the four regulators is of course a possibility. Would RBI mandate the use of AA for all credit products? So far, the approach and the regime has been that it's what we call a hybrid regime. If you look at open banking regimes, there are regulatory regimes like UK where they mandated the top seven banks with a date to say you've got to finish your implementation, and there are fully open regimes like the US. We are a middle hybrid regime where there is tech specs, master directions, but the adoption is left to the industry, right? So we don't really know of any intent of RBI mandating stuff, but there is constant dialogue happening, and I think advocacy from the ministry and the government and regulators will certainly happen. At this stage, we don't know of any intent for them to mandate this through a formal mechanism. Super. Okay, I'm already 3 minutes. Can we have top 10 list of FIUs who raised concerns for those? Well, I mean, again, this is a wiki of. So, look, the information of market shares and information of who's doing well or who's not doing well is not something that we believe we should be sharing, because those really are market information. I'm sure in the market all of you will know. Our goal is to share and restrict dashboards to aggregate information that is, publicly available, and member information that's privately available, right? So I hope all of you will respect that. So we don't know, but you know that there are 9 FIPs, and you know that overall, if you go to our website, you will see that there's a total of close to 20 now banks and NBFCs and RIAs that are live. Of course, traffic is at different stages. Not everybody has switched on the tap in terms of promotion and active bringing on to the fullest extent. People are testing waters, but we have, like I said, 1 lakh consents. Our sense is that perhaps close to about 500 crores worth loans has been disbursed using AA rails, and perhaps close to about 5,000 loans actually. So 1 lakh consents really represents leads, but our sense, gut feel, please don't quote me, is that perhaps 500 crores and 5,000 loans have happened. The players. There's a couple of NBFCs, couple of banks who are leading the way today. So that's all that I can say on that. All right, thanks. We are already 5 minutes late. The TSPs are getting nervous about losing you guys. Please stay on. Quick mechanism. I will now end the session. You will then go back and you will see three distinct sessions. The way we've organized it is three TSPs are featured as spotlight TSPs today in each of the three areas. One is TSPs that offer middleware for onboarding FIPs, FIUs. Second is TSPs that offer data analytics services. And third, TSPs that offer UX services. Please feel free to choose which one you want to attend, flit through those, and we have a 30-minute session, and hopefully it will be interesting for everyone. Thank you, guys. Thanks for your patience.